In this video, we will review mean word problems. When we think about the word mean, it is actually a part of the field of statistics, where we are given tools to evaluate data sets. Mean also has an equivalent word called average. You might be a little bit more familiar with the term average, but guess what? They actually mean the same thing. So when you want to go ahead and calculate an average or a mean of a set of numbers, you're going to do two things. Step one, you're going to find the sum of all the data points. So go ahead and write that down. We are finding the sum of all the data points. Once you have the sum of all of the listed data points, you're going to go ahead and divide that sum by the total number of numbers. Okay? So we are going to divide the sum by the total number of data points. It's a pretty simple concept. You should be familiar with this from 5th grade, 6th grade. It's something that you've encountered. So we're going to do a quick review of the basics of how you calculate the mean or the average, and then I'm going to help you to get to the next step of some of the advanced SHSAT problems that you might encounter. Let's do a quick review of what this might look like. So let's say I give you a set of numbers, the number 3, 5, 8, 10, maybe in 15, okay? And we want to find the mean or the average of this data set. As we said above, we're going to find the sum of the given numbers. So we have 3 plus 5 is 8, plus another 8 is 16, plus 10 is 26, plus 15, that's about 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41. So we have 41 representing the sum, okay? So that's the sum of our 5 data points. Now to go ahead and find the average, we're going to take that sum and divide by the number of data points. And if you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 data points. When we do 41 divided by 5, we know that 5 goes into 40 8 times, and then the remainder is actually going to be 1. We add a 0, and now we have 10 divided by 5 is 2. So our average is actually going to be 8.2. Let's use our baseline understanding of calculating the mean to go ahead and solve more complex average/mean word problems. We're going to use the mean formula to solve the following problem. But before we do that, let's think of a different way to think about the mean formula. When we calculate the mean, we have to do two things. We need to find the sum of n numbers in the data set, and then we need to divide by n. Don't worry about this little n that's written here at the top. We call it a subscript. And that subscript is just a simple reminder for us that tells us how many numbers we're adding up to make up that total sum. And then when we divide that sum by n, we get the average. The SHSAT doesn't actually test the formula in this way. Most commonly, you're going to be given the average and the total number of numbers, and you're going to have to use these two data points in order to solve for the sum. So we're going to rewrite this formula so it's more user-friendly. The inverse of dividing by n is actually to multiply both sides of this equation by n. So we'll cancel out the two n values on the left-hand side, simply leaving the sum of n numbers is equal to the average times the number of numbers. This is the formula that we want you to memorize as it relates to the SHSAT mean/average word problems. So go ahead and keep that in mind while we tackle this problem. If Naj scored 76, 84, 69, 74, and 91, what must he score on the next test to get an 82? You'll notice that we're given 5 test scores. But when we look at the average of 82, that's actually based on 6 test scores. So let's use the formula we just discussed. The sum of 6 scores is going to be equal to the average times 6, which is the total number of exam scores that we want to work with. So we're going to go ahead and multiply 82 times 6. This is going to give us the sum of all 6 test scores. Remember, we don't know what that 6th test score is, but it would be helpful to us if we knew what the total sum needs to look like. When we multiply 82 times 6, of course we start off by multiplying 6 times 2, which is 12, and I'll carry the 1. And then 6 times 8 is 48, plus 1 is 49. So we know that the sum of 6 numbers is actually 492. The last step is simply to add up the sum of the 5 numbers and to see what the delta is. The delta just means the difference between the sum of the 5 numbers and the sum of the 6 numbers, because we know that the sum of 5 numbers plus the 6th test score is going to give us the sum of all 6 exam scores. It just makes sense. Let's go ahead and add up the first 5 exam scores to see what Naj needs to score on his 6th exam. After adding up these 5 exam scores, we see that Naj has scored a total of 394 points on his first 5 exams. We don't know what the 5th test score is, but we do know that the total sum of all 6 exams must equal to 492. So of course the last step is simply to subtract 492 minus 394. And we get a final score of 98. When we subtract 394 from 492, we get a final score of 98. So 98 is what Naj must score on the next exam to end off his semester with an 82 average. Let's try out another problem. Ed got an 85, 72, 93, and 97 on the first 4 social studies tests he took this marking period. If there will be a total of 5 tests, what grade would he need to finish with a 90 average? Remember, average and mean is exactly the same thing, so we can use those words interchangeably. If we can recall, we're going to use the same formula that we talked about before. Even though 4 exam scores are given, we actually want to find the sum of all 5 exams so that we can figure out what that total sum needs to look like. So we're going to use our rewritten average formula. The sum of 5 exams is going to equal the average times 5. And our average of the 5 exams at the end of the marking period needs to be a 90. I do this all the time when I'm in school, when I used to be in college, when I was in high school. Let's say I got a few scores on the first couple exams in the semester. I wanted to make sure that I ended off with a 4.0 GPA, which in high school is really a score somewhere in the 90s. So I had to identify, well, what would I need to score on my next couple exams to make sure that I end off this semester strong? So it's a great formula to keep in mind as you navigate your academic career. So we'll see that we need the sum of all 5 exams to be 450 points. Ed is seriously going to have to focus to pull his average up to a 90. So let's see what he needs to score on his 5th exam. Now that we know that the sum of the 5 exams is 450, we need to go ahead and find the sum of the first 4 exams, because we know that the sum of the first 4 plus the 5th exam is going to give us 450 total possible points. Let's go ahead and add up the first 4 exam scores. After adding Ed's first 4 exams, we get 347 as the total sum for his first 4. Then we're going to add a variable, x, to represent the score that he will receive on his 5th exam. And of course, all 5 scores need to add up to 450. Now I'm going to go ahead and subtract 347 from both sides of this equation. This is going to allow us to identify what Ed must score on his 5th exam. Now I can see that Ed is going to need 103 on his 5th exam in order to get the average of a 90 on his final report card grade. That means he's definitely going to need some extra credit. okay? So he's going to have to put in some extra work to make this possible. But guess what? As long as he's focused and diligent and committed, he can definitely do it. Now this problem may seem a little tricky, but I know that you can do it. We're going to use the same formula that I gave you that's going to help you to navigate with success. Let's write that formula down for our reference. We have that the sum of n numbers equals the average times the number of numbers. Let's annotate our word problem to look for the relevant information for our problem. Our first sentence says that the mean of 20 numbers, so we have the total number of data points that we're working with, is equal to 42. So let's find the sum of those 20 numbers. The sum of 20 numbers is equal to 42 times 20. When we multiply this amount, we understand that the sum of these 20 numbers is actually 840. Notice that the problem doesn't tell us anything about the actual data points. We don't know if it's equal to 20 and 65 and 80 and 100. None of that information is given. But we do know the average and the total number of data points. The second sentence tells us a little bit more about the problem. It states that 4 of the 20 numbers have a mean of 50. So let's go ahead and find the sum of those 4 numbers. We have the sum of the 4 included numbers is going to be 50 times 4. That, of course, is 200. So guess what? If we want to find the mean of the other 16 numbers, okay, we have to set up a little formula that's quite simple. To find the mean of the other 16 numbers, we need to divide the sum of 16 numbers by 16. Now I'm sure you're thinking, how are we going to get the sum of those 16 numbers? Well, guess what? We have a very simple formula to do that. We know that we have the sum of all 20 numbers, and that's going to be equal to the sum of the 16 numbers plus the sum of the 4 numbers. As long as we have one equation with one unknown, we can actually solve. The sum of all 20 numbers was 840. And the sum of the 4 numbers was just 200. So I'm sure you're starting to understand how we can find the sum of those 16 numbers. Now you got it. We're going to subtract 200 on both sides of this equation. And we have the sum of 16 numbers is going to be 640. If we go ahead and plug that value into our equation, we have 640 divided by 16 is equal to 40. So 40 is actually the mean of the other 16 numbers. Let's tackle 2 more problems before we move on to a different type of mean word problem. The mean score of 10 players was 6.5. One player's score was dropped, changing the mean of the remaining scores to 6.0. What score was dropped? Just like we said before, we're going to use the modified mean formula. We have the sum of 10 players is equal to 6.5, that's their average, times the 10 players' scores. 6.5 times 10 is 65. So we know that the sum of all 10 players is 65. One player's score was dropped, changing the mean of the remaining scores to 6.0. If we remove one of the player's scores, we actually only have 9 players remaining. So we say the sum of those 9 players is going to be equal to 6.0 times 9. We have that the sum of the 9 players is 54. I'm sure you can simply see that the sum of 10 players is equal to the player's score that was dropped plus the sum of those 9 players, right? If we add up the sum of all of those 9 players, including the one that was removed, we would have the sum of all 10 players. So we have 65 equals x plus 54. Of course, I can subtract 54 on both sides, So I have that x equals 11. The final answer is D. If the mean of W, X, Y, and Z is 60, and the mean of V, X, Y, and Z is 62, what is the value of V minus W? I will tackle the equation that includes V first, and then the equation that includes W second. Make sure you pause this video and give this question a try before you actually watch the solution. Looking at the second set of information, it says that the mean of V, X, Y, and Z is 62. So that includes 4 elements. We know that V plus X plus Y plus Z is actually equal to 62 times 4 because there are 4 elements included. Then we also know, if we look at the information given in the first part of the problem, W plus X plus Y plus Z is equal to 60 times 4. 62 times 4 is 248, and 60 times 4 is 240. So let's rewrite these equations again. Now that we have the equations rewritten, guess what? We can actually subtract these 2 equations. I hope you knew that that was possible. We can subtract the top equation by the bottom equation. Notice that when we subtract these 2 equations from one another, Z minus Z, right? So this whole bottom equation is going to be subtracted. Z minus Z is 0. Y minus Y is 0. And X minus X is also 0. Let's see what we have left. We now have V minus W on the left-hand side of our equation, and we have 248 minus 240, which is equal to 8 on the right-hand side of our equation. So the question actually asks us, what is the value of V minus W? So we can see that that answer is 8.
If you learned something in this video, please go ahead and like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.